Before going on the expedition cruise to Antarctica I'm just back from, I rather naively thought that an expedition cruise was basically a regular cruise that went to more remote destinations. I was wrong, as you're about to find out. By the way, if you're new here, welcome aboard. I'm Gary Bembridge, and it's my goal to help make it easier and more fun to discover, plan and enjoy unforgettable cruise vacations like expedition ones. Before I get into some of the unexpected aspects of expedition cruising, let me quickly address some of the more obvious ones, even though I probably hadn't realized the significance of them all when I went. First of all, an expedition cruise costs much more per day than a regular cruise. An Antarctic cruise, for example, tours of the Arctic, will set you back around $1,000 US dollars per day per person based on dual occupancy of an ocean view cabin, one of the more affordable lines with flights and the cruise. Second, while they go to harder and more remote places like the Arctic, Antarctica, Galapagos, Greenland and Canadian Northwest Passage, I see you can also go on an expedition cruise to places that regular cruises go, like Alaska, Iceland and the Amazon. That brings me on to the third issue, where the key difference between an expedition cruise is they use a different kind of ship in all of these places. They're smaller to navigate into more remote and harder to reach places, because some places actually restrict the number of people that can visit or are permitted to do landings at any one time. They need to be smaller. In Antarctica, for example, only 100 people are allowed on land at any one time, and so most expedition ships like Ponant La Real I was on only carries a maximum of 200 guests to be able to kind of offer the amount of landings and experiences that everyone expects every day. Larger ships in these areas tend to only offer sail-by scenic cruising, for example. Then there's a practical thing that expedition ships have to have versus regular cruise ships. They have to have strengthened hulls if they're going to go into the Arctic or Antarctica for the ice. They need shallow drafts so they can get into smaller, more remote places. They need facilities like a mudroom to clean off your boots when coming back off land. They also have to have room for the zodiacs and cranes to lower and raise the zodiacs into the water. They have to have space to hold plenty of fuel and food because they're going to cruise for longer periods of time in areas without the ability to restock. Most also have much more limited facilities than regular cruise ships, usually just a main dining room, maybe a buffet dining room, a lounge, a lecture theatre, a photo centre, a small spa and gym. You're not going to find things like casinos and other kind of fancy facilities. I also found as I planned this last expedition cruise is that the most established cruise lines in expedition are very different to those in regular cruising. Those well-established expedition lines include names like Lindblad, which also run National Geographic, Quark, Uncruise, Abercrombie & Kent, Polar Quest, Atlas, Aurora, Intrepid and so on. But slowly, well, in fact, increasingly quickly, classic cruise lines are coming into the space. You've got Celebrity, Hurtigruten, Hapag-Lloyd, Ponant, Crystal, Seabourn, Silversea, Viking. Most of these regular classic cruise lines have actually created a separate expedition division, which is also a clear signal that things are incredibly different. And here's where it gets really interesting and where I started to encounter a lot of unexpected differences. When I go on a regular cruise to the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, Alaska and so on, I know day by day where I'm going to be, what time I'll be getting there, what I can do when I'm there and what time I'll be leaving. Many ships on these routes run the same itinerary week after week, and they will be at the same place at the same time every single week. There may be, of course, some delays or rate changes because of bad weather to those itineraries. Our expedition leader, Raphael, who's been doing expedition cruising for 12 years, claimed that no cruise he has done, even to the same destination in a season, is the same as the one before. There's no fixed itinerary. There's just a set of goals and a rough plan. So, for example, he had 4 goals for the trip that I've just got back from, to get us to South Georgia, South Orkneys, the Antarctic Peninsula and the South Shetlands. He then had a rough plan of where we would be going in each of those, what we'd do when we got there, but he just didn't know and he couldn't promise or guarantee anything. On expedition cruises like this, they can only properly plan the next day based on the weather and ice that they learn about the day before. And even then we had plans scrapped and changed on a number of mornings because once we arrived it was just not possible to do because of wind, the swell or the ice. There are no ports of call with docks on expedition cruises like this one I was on. There are bays, there's old whaling stations, research stations, nesting areas, penguin colonies or places of historic interest. We literally just sailed into a remote spot, got into the zodiacs and went exploring. On a classic cruise, when I get my daily program, I can be fairly sure everything will run as advertised and on time. This is not the case on an expedition cruise. The daily program is a guideline. It's not set in stone, and it can and it will change often. The other thing I found on an expedition cruise, which is different to classic cruising, is to expect sudden interruptions and diversions. For example, one lunchtime sailing between Grytviken and St Andrews Bay for our afternoon landing, we were interrupted by the captain during lunch to say we were diverting to follow some orca whales. This happened another evening during a briefing. We were having a briefing when humpback whales were spotted, and we diverted to follow them and scrap the briefing while that took place. Another unexpected diversion was just after dinner one evening when the captain announced he'd seen an area in Wilhelmina Bay where he believed he could physically push into the ice shelf and let us step out of the ship and walk on the ice, which we did around 11 o'clock at night. So when you look at an advertised itinerary for an expedition cruise, the list of wildlife you're going to see, the places it says you will call on, understand it will be unpredictable and definitely changeable. Another thing driven home to me is that expedition cruising, unlike regular cruising, has many risks. They are higher for travelers, higher for the cruise line, the ship, the crew, and even the places you call on. In our first briefing, we were told repeatedly that safety is paramount because going into a remote place means that one person's misfortune affects everybody dramatically. If someone's injured or falls seriously ill, the ship would have to leave the area and go and find help. We would have to turn around and head, say, to Ushuaia in Argentina or to the Falklands, many hundreds or thousands of nautical miles away. It would be at least 2 days to get there. On a regular cruise, it's closer to civilization, and a medevac or seeking attention at the next port a day or so away is possible, and the entire trip is not thrown off. The other difference related to this is to go on an expedition cruise like the one I was on versus a regular cruise is I had to have much more pre-trip medical screening. For the trip I did on Ponant, I had to have a full medical with my GP, my doctor, who had to sign it off saying I was fit and healthy to go. To do some optional activities like a polar plunge or kayaking required even more. It required a heart scan. The other thing that really drove home to me the risk is we had a series of mandatory briefings. Never on a classic cruise do you see anything other than the muster drill with the word mandatory included. For example, we had a mandatory briefing before we were allowed to get off the ship in Antarctica. This is required by the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators, IATO, founded in 1991. This includes how to behave and be safe on land, which animals to stay away from, how far to stay away from them, what to do if they get aggressive, and so on. We had another mandatory briefing where we had to go and learn how to get on and off the Zodiacs, for example. We then had another mandatory activity where all the clothes that we were going to wear externally had to be checked, screened, vacuumed. There are really strict rules to stop the introduction of foreign plants or seeds into Antarctica and moving anything like that between the different sites. So we had our external clothes, rucksacks, and so on screened and checked, in fact, a couple of times during the cruise. And when we came back from each landing, we had to vigorously and rigorously clean our boots. There were strict rules on each landing with areas kind of laid out and marked where we could go, and no divergence was allowed because of the risks, whether it's slipping on the ice or the rocks or being attacked by an animal or whatever. The risks are greater and much more intensely enforced compared to a classic cruise. Another big thing I found out is exactly how the cruise operates, and the priorities are very different on an expedition versus the classic cruise. The ship becomes more of a floating expedition base than a floating resort as it is on a classic cruise. It's basically a place to rest, relax, and be briefed between the different explorations. This led to 7 big differences I discovered across my trip to the way regular cruises run. First, there's no big entertainment team, which is fundamental to a classic cruise. Instead, it's replaced by an expedition team. On this cruise I was on, there were 14 in the expedition team. They were naturalists, historians, bird experts, geologists, marine biologists, experts on glaciers. They are the entertainment. Entertainment is enrichment, not production shows, quizzes, bingo, and so on. Enrichment lectures on a classic cruise is one of the entertainment activities. On an expedition cruise, it is the entertainment, it is the star. We did have a bit of live music in the evenings in the lounge by a small group of musicians and singers, but the focus was on the talks and on the recaps. We had up to 3 lectures a day on sea days. We had briefings and recaps every day based on what we'd seen that particular day. Late nights and partying are not a thing on expedition cruises, unlike on classic cruises. Secondly, the photographic team also plays a very different role in expedition cruising. Rather than taking pictures of me with the captain or whatever, they were always out taking pictures of the wildlife and making a video of the cruise and the experience, which of course are available to buy still. Third, in terms of excursions, that's a different thing as well. On a classic cruise, I'm used to choosing from a wide range of different excursions in any particular port. That's not what happens on an expedition cruise. There was basically no choice of things to do at a stop. I could either take part in what was on offer or not take part. There are 3 main things that happened on this expedition cruise and others. First of all, scenic cruising on the ship. Secondly, scenic cruising on Zodiacs. And thirdly, wet landings where I got to hike or explore in a specific area, as I mentioned earlier. The only thing that was optional, I could have paid to go kayaking in a few spots. The magical thing for me, anyway, were the wet landings, as I could walk on amazing beaches, see seals, penguins, and walk amongst them. I also enjoyed the cruising on the Zodiacs because I got to go and see some of the wildlife, like birds nesting on cliffs, get closer up to icebergs and glaciers. The fourth key difference is packing and clothes. It's very different to classic cruise. The thing that gets people worried on a classic cruise is the dress code. Is it a smart dress code? Is there a party night? And so on. On expedition cruises, it is different. First, you have to pack very specific gear for the region. So for the Antarctic or the Arctic, I had to bring a series of layers. The base layer is a kind of a long john type of stuff, then an insulating layer, then it has to have an outer layer which had to be waterproof. Most of these I had to provide for myself. Most expedition cruises give you the big warm parka, which is a bright color, normally red like the Ponant one. The idea is that everybody wears these parkas, and so on land they can see at a distance everybody very easily. I had brought my own boots because I had bought them on a previous trip, but Ponant did hire boots to save people having to carry them because they were pretty heavy. To ensure people were protected, there was a list of mandatory things we had to bring, so a mandatory packing list. This included a head covering, a neck warmer, not a scarf because that could blow away, waterproof trousers, thick socks, waterproof gloves, inner gloves, and the high boots because you step off into water of the Zodiacs. There's no mandatory list on a regular cruise, as even the dress code is largely optional. Talking of dress code, I soon realized that on an expedition cruise that no one pays attention to the dress code. On Ponant, the pre-cruise booklet spoke at length about dress codes for gala nights, smart casual, no jeans, bring a suit, a tie and formal nights. Nobody paid any attention. People like me wore what we wanted to. It's because it's all about the expedition. It's all about having the right clothes to go on the tour. It's not about the dress code back on the ship. Fifthly, interestingly, dining and food is also much less of a focus, certainly I found. Of course, food is important and the food is basically the same as on a regular cruise, but I found a really big shift in the role of dining on an expedition cruise. People want to go in, have lunch, have dinner, get to bed, get ready for the next day. It was a chance to, of course, socialize, share experiences from the day, but its role seemed much more functional, I felt anyway. Sixthly, unlike a regular cruise, I found that being active and mobile is really key to have the best and get the most from an expedition cruise. I had to climb in and out of Zodiacs, often when there were swells, leap out into the shallow ocean for the landing. The landings usually include hiking, kind of up steep snow and ice-covered hills. I did find expedition versus regular cruising quite a tiring process because it's so active, often with really early starts. Next, one of the most important things I learned that's different between a classic cruise and an expedition cruise, as we were advised to do this by the expedition leader, is the importance of standing still and just looking. On a classic cruise, we're all out wanting to do things, have fun, enjoy ourselves, and to capture that. However, what I realized on an expedition cruise is the ultimate thing to do is to put my camera down, just stand and look at the view, the incredible hill I've hiked up, the glacier, watch the elephant seals, the Antarctic fur seals, the king penguins, and just slowly take what is going in, listen to the sounds, drink in the sights. Just stopping, standing still, and taking it all in is something that really matters on an expedition cruise. I had a number of other incredible revelations based on my expedition cruise, which is in this video, starting with the biggest shock to me around what man has done and is doing in these regions. See you over there.